was today years old when I found out that I'm not the only one that has to watch tennis on mute due to the terrible commentators. The hate coming from the commentators' booth for our players has been so real for so long. And the only way that I can watch tennis is just to turn off the sound entirely. But thanks to this comment, I'm seeing that a lot of other people have done this too. Because let these commentators tell it, we only win because we're athletic. We have terrible games. And even when we're the best in the world, like Coco is, they come out and predict that the 361st player in the world is going to win.
Coco Gauff just delivered one of the biggest moments of her young career, capturing the WTA Finals title in Saudi Arabia after defeating the world's top two players back-to-back. At just 20 years old, she stood tall with the trophy, but instead of simply celebrating the victory, she shared a powerful message on social media that struck a deeper chord. She spoke openly about shutting down the bad season narrative, proving doubters wrong, and rising above months of criticism that followed her every move. That single post exposed a bigger question many tend to ignore. Why does a player ranked number 3 in the world, a Grand Slam finalist with multiple titles to her name, still feel the need to defend herself against labels of failure?
They never really give our athletes their flowers for how incredible they are. And when you've been to 3 Grand Slam finals by the age of 21, you are exceptional. There are few tennis players in history who've accomplished as much as this young woman has, but you wouldn't know it by listening to some of that commentary. That's why I and so many other people just watch the match and drown out the noise. And I hope Coco and the rest of our players continue to do the same.
Why is Coco Gauff, a 20-year-old champion, spending nearly half an hour every day blocking people who target her online? The truth isn't comfortable, and it goes far beyond tennis itself. What she deals with daily highlights a troubling pattern that has gone overlooked for far too long, where young Black female athletes are judged by a completely different standard, face harsher criticism, endure deeper scrutiny, and receive far less understanding than others in the spotlight. And the moment they step outside their sport to share opinions or speak their truth, the reaction is swift and often unforgiving. This story may center on how the media treats Coco Gauff, but in reality, it points to a much larger issue that reaches across the entire world of sports.
Predicted Coco Gauff's downfall, and she won anyway. The tennis media establishment was so against Coco Gauff that they predicted that she would lose to the 361st player in the world in the semifinals. For context, Coco is ranked number 2 in the world. When have you ever seen anyone predict that the world number 2, a Grand Slam champion, was going to go down to 361 of anything? And before you say that this was some random sports writer making this prediction, it was not. It was the executive editor of Tennis Magazine, Steve Tigner. Tennis Magazine is the biggest tennis publication that there is.
Once you really start paying attention, the double standards become impossible to ignore, which raises the bigger question: why does this keep happening? Take a closer look at how the media framed Coco Gauff's 2024 season, constantly pushing the idea that she was struggling, underperforming, and stuck in some kind of slump. But the reality tells a completely different story. She reached the semifinals of the Australian Open, advanced to the final of the French Open, captured titles in Auckland, Beijing, and across China, and still finished the year ranked number 3 in the world. For most players, that kind of performance would be celebrated as an outstanding season. Yet for Coco, it was somehow spun into a narrative of disappointment.
Executive editor of Tennis Magazine was so angry that Coco won that he wrote the nastiest article describing her victory. Remember, this is the same guy that predicted that Coco would lose to the player ranked 361st in the world. He repeatedly described Coco as getting lucky. He called the match off kilter. He called the match scrappy and said that it wasn't a thing of beauty. And he even threw shade on Gauff's mental strength and her strokes, saying that patience and resilience were more important than the beauty of your technique in that match. What? Now it gets even worse than this, but this article is so bad that you would have thought that Steve Tigner is being paid by Coco's opponent to write this crap.
The narrative hit its peak at the US Open, when Coco Gauff lost to Emma Navarro after committing 19 double faults, and suddenly that single match became the only thing anyone wanted to discuss. The conversation quickly shifted to claims that her serve was broken, her confidence was gone, and that she couldn't handle pressure, turning one difficult day into the headline that defined her entire season while everything else she achieved was pushed aside. Tennis analyst Andy Roddick openly pointed out the imbalance, explaining that criticism seems to come much faster for Coco than it does for others. And Coco herself summed it up best by highlighting how the exact same results that earn praise for other players somehow lead to harsh backlash for her, proving that identical performances can receive completely different reactions depending on who is on the court.
Rather than say anything good about Coco, who won that second set in a hurry, he just chose to say that the ball was sailing on Sabalenka, as if Coco weren't even on the court. And of course, in the end, he downplayed Gauff's win by saying that even though it was technically an upset, it wasn't even a surprise. Now again, this is the same guy who said that she'd be losing to number 361 in the world because her game was evenly matched. He refuses to say the truth. Coco played exceptionally, and no one could have beaten her on that day.
At just 20 years old, Coco Gauff has already claimed a Grand Slam title, secured a spot in the world's top 3, and achieved more than most professional tennis players ever will. Yet somehow even that isn't enough to shield her from being labeled a failure after a single tough loss. Still, she continues to show up, compete, and win, and each time she proves herself again, the same voices that once questioned her suddenly go quiet. Her victories are treated like side notes, while her setbacks dominate the headlines, creating a pattern that becomes impossible to ignore once you truly look at it. When male players struggle with their serve or face technical issues, the discussion often focuses on adjustments and mechanics with a tone of understanding. But when Coco faces similar challenges, the narrative shifts completely, turning into questions about her mindset, her confidence, and whether she can handle the pressure of being a champion.
Tennis Channel, you need to fire your executive editor, Steve Tigner, because there is no way that he should be insulting about the greatest American champion of her generation. You cannot get upset that pickleball is surpassing tennis when you talk about statistically one of the greatest players ever at her age this way.
Take a look at how Carlos Alcaraz is covered in the media. He's young, he's had ups and downs, and he's lost matches people expected him to win, yet the narrative around him stays positive, painting him as a future legend who's simply still developing. He's given time, patience, and understanding. Meanwhile, Coco Gauff, at the same age and facing the same level of pressure, is met with immediate questions about whether she has already peaked, as if the grace extended to him suddenly disappears when it comes to her. And this pattern goes far beyond tennis. Across sports, when male athletes speak out on social issues, they're often praised as bold and principled. But when female athletes, especially Black women, do the same, they're told to stay in their lane. LeBron James can build schools and speak on politics, and is widely applauded for using his platform, while Coco faces waves of criticism and comments telling her to be quiet and just play. What really exposes the bias is how quickly the backlash builds, with the pile-on happening almost instantly. When Coco Gauff loses even a single match, the reaction is immediate, with dozens of articles appearing within hours breaking down everything from her game to her coaching choices and even her mental strength, while other top players can drop multiple matches in a row and barely attract attention. The level of scrutiny she faces isn't just intense, it's clearly disproportionate, yet it's often ignored. Coco has openly shared something many athletes choose to keep private, revealing that she spends around 30 minutes every day blocking people on social media, which isn't just casual scrolling, but a constant effort to deal with a wave of harassment that never seems to stop. The criticism goes far beyond tennis, with people targeting her appearance, her family, her personality, and nearly every aspect of her life, questioning her intelligence, mocking her voice, and picking apart her outfits, interviews, and posts just to find something negative. And this isn't the work of just a few random trolls, but thousands of accounts that repeatedly show up, ready to criticize at any given moment, making it clear that she's dealing with something much bigger. And she's far from the only athlete facing it. Caroline Garcia has spoken about facing the same reality, describing the constant wave of negativity, the abuse that follows every loss, and the mental exhaustion of knowing that no matter what you achieve, there are always people trying to tear you down. But for Coco Gauff, it carries an even heavier weight. At just 20 years old, while most people are still figuring out their lives away from public attention, she's growing up under a spotlight where every mistake is amplified and turned into content by those who haven't come close to her level of success. The impact on mental health is very real. And while more athletes are beginning to speak openly about it, the conversation rarely goes far enough to address who is targeted the most. Young Black female athletes often face a unique level of hostility that others simply don't experience in the same way. And when they call it out, they're quickly dismissed as overly sensitive or accused of playing the victim, leaving them stuck in a situation where no matter how they respond, the criticism never fully stops. Coco Gauff has never shied away from speaking on issues that matter to her, whether it's showing up at protests, calling out policies in Florida, or using her platform to talk about equality and justice. But every time she does, the reaction follows a familiar pattern, with waves of voices telling her to stick to tennis, stay in her lane, and keep her opinions to herself. When she spoke out about Florida politics, the backlash was immediate, with thousands of comments flooding in telling her to be quiet and just play, while conservative media outlets questioned why her voice should matter, and radio hosts mocked the idea that she could inspire change, sending a clear message that she's expected to entertain, not challenge. This isn't a new experience either, as Serena Williams faced the same treatment for years, often labeled difficult or aggressive whenever she spoke about inequality, and even penalized in situations where male players faced no consequences, all while being told to simply be grateful and stop complaining. The pattern continues with each new generation of Black female athletes who refuse to stay silent, especially when compared to how male athletes are treated, often praised as leaders and role models when they speak out or start initiatives, with sports networks applauding them for using their platforms in a positive way. Magazine covers cheer him for speaking out, but when Coco does the same, suddenly she's overstepping and being divisive, told to just stick to her sport. The double standard is glaring, and the fact it repeats isn't accidental. It exposes a deep discomfort with young Black women claiming their voice matters beyond the court.